it's Jessii Vee. The snow outside is literally blinding me. We had a huge snowstorm last night and now the sun is like reflecting off of it into my eyes. I'll be fine though. So in today's video, we are going to be talking about fairy tales, but not just any normal fairy tales. We are used to Disney movies and happy stories about princesses and friendly dragons and everything happy-go-lucky in the world. But if you go back in history, the fairy tales they told were actually very dark. For example, the nice story you know about Snow White isn't the truth. The nice story you know about Rapunzel isn't the truth. The nice story about Cinderella isn't the truth. Disney took those fairy tales and made them into something happier than what they originally were. So I'm going to be exposing the darkness of all of your favorite fairy tales, which makes me sound like a horrible person, but here we are. Before I get started, I just want to announce that we have a whole bunch of new Valentine's Day colored plushes on my website. There's literally so many, go check them out. My favorite one though is this fluffy narwhal. This is the fluffiest thing I've ever seen, and he's like rainbow colored. He actually kind of blends in with this background. But all of these different styles of Valentine's Day plushes are only available for a limited time. The link to the site is down below in the description. For anybody who wasn't able to get a Valentine's Day box, these are also a really cool option. And yeah, let's get into the video. The reason why I really wanted to do this video today is because the topic of this video reminded me of a very creepy fairy tale that someone told me when I was a kid. And I remember the day someone told me this because it scared me so much. So when I was in elementary school, every so often we'd have like a storyteller come to our school and all the classes would gather in the auditorium to listen to this story. Basically, the story was about this hidden castle in an enchanted forest, which is pretty cliche, right? And in that castle was apparently a princess who was put under a spell that made her sleep for eternity until she was woken up by true love's first kiss. Which again, cliche, right? Kind of sounds like Sleeping Beauty, but we aren't at the creepy part yet. So princes traveled far and wide to see if they could be the ones to break this curse. But every time they'd find the castle and go inside, they would always leave running and screaming without the princess with them. The princes wouldn't tell anyone what happened. They were too afraid. And this went on for years and years. Finally, one day, a brave prince ventured into this castle. He walked up the stairs and found the princess sleeping in her room. He walked right up to her and looked down and didn't see a face on her body. Yeah, this princess had no face. I mean, shocker, you can tell by the title. He was shocked at first, but instead of running and screaming, he lifted her hand and gently kissed it. Immediately, the spell was broken and he was able to see her beautiful face. No other prince had been able to do that because they were too afraid of her when they first saw her. I think the moral of the story they were trying to tell the kids in the school is like, don't judge people by looking at them, which is definitely a good thing to try and teach people. I just thought the way they went about it, like a no-face princess. I just remember going home from school that day and my mom was like, so how was your day?
Mom, it was horrible. There was a no-face princess.
Anyways though, I just wanted to tell you that very strange story I was told as a kid, and now we're gonna move on to the dark side of fairy tales. Now, most of the stories I'm going to tell you come from a book called Grimm's Fairy Tales. A collection of fairy tales by the Grimm brothers was first published on the 20th of December in 1812. It had 210 very unique fairy tales, and these stories aren't your happy endings, but rather sometimes gruesome and shocking tales. Back in that time, they wrote fairy tales more for adults, which is super weird. They were kind of just like these magical horror stories, and if a kid ever read them, they would have nightmares for years. I actually have to show you, I do own one of the Grimm's fairy tale books. This is obviously not like the original version. That version's probably worth like trillion, billion, million dollars. But all their short stories are through this book, and the funny thing is, I got this book when I was very young thinking, oh, they're nice fairy tales. No, young Jessii, they're not. I think I read like 2 too, and then I was like, wait mom, this ain't about the real Snow White that I know. So let's first compare the Disney version of Snow White and the Grimm brothers version of Snow White. As you know from the Disney movie, there's a beautiful girl, an evil queen, 7 dwarves, a poison apple, a prince, a magical kiss, you know the whole deal. But the Grimm brothers has a much darker version of this story. So you know how in the Disney one, the queen asks the huntsman to bring back Snow White's heart, which yes, really disturbing, but if you read the original Grimm brothers version, she asks the huntsman to bring back Snow White's lungs and liver. Her lungs and liver. I don't know why those specific body parts, but it's messed up. And the original Snow White was only 7 years old, which makes it even worse. Oh, and I forgot to mention, the queen wanted to eat her lungs and liver. In the movie, Snow White is woken up by the prince's kiss, but in the original story, the prince basically puts sleeping Snow White onto the back of his horse and like takes her to the castle, and she wakes up because the horse is like bouncing too much. What? They end up falling in love, having a wedding, and for some reason they decide to invite the evil queen to their wedding. Definitely makes sense, right? It was all a trick, and when she arrives, Snow White gives her these burning hot slippers that she took out of the fire and forces the evil queen to wear them and dance in them. So like her feet were burning and on fire. I mean, it's no wonder that Disney changed all of this. All right, next let's compare the Disney Cinderella and the original Cinderella. So all of you guys know how the Cinderella tale was told to you as a kid. Well, in the original version, she didn't have glass slippers. The slippers were made out of squirrel fur. They were furry slippers. You know in the Disney movie when the prince is going through the town trying to find out who this glass slipper belongs to? In the original book, the stepsisters know that their foot is not going to fit into the slipper, so they chop off parts of their foot to fit inside the slipper. They physically made their feet smaller to fit inside the slipper. And obviously that would look very gruesome, and the prince noticed right away and knew they were lying. Eventually, Cinderella and the prince get married and invite everybody in the land to come to the wedding, but when the stepsisters arrived, pigeons fly out of the sky and poke them in the eyes. Good. No, that's so horrible. What? Why are people writing this stuff? I'm sorry if I'm like ruining your entire childhood here. Okay, let's move on to the story of the 3 little pigs. You guys know, I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down, and he goes to like each pig and blows their house down. Well, in the original version, after he blows down each pig's house, he goes and eats the pig, which is not the story I was told as a kid. I thought they survived. Next, let's talk about the Frog Prince. Now, in the version that we probably all know, it's a classic tale of the princess who sees a frog, gives it a kiss, and the frog turns into this tall, handsome prince. I don't know why she's out kissing frogs, but it worked. In the original version, she doesn't actually kiss the frog. What she does is she smacks it against a wall until he turns into a prince. Logic. The Little Mermaid, the Disney version is definitely like one of my favorite movies ever, but the original version, this was actually written by a Danish writer named Hans Christian Andersen in 1837. Basically, what he says is that when mermaids die, their bodies turn into sea foam and kind of just go back into the sea. They don't go to heaven, which is basically why the Little Mermaid wanted to turn into a human. So she goes to a sea witch to solve her problem. Now, in the Disney version, she goes to Ursula, makes a deal with her, and Ursula takes her voice away from her. Now, in the original version, the sea witch cuts off her tongue. Yeah, she just bye-bye tongue. And unlike the movie, the story does not end happily ever after. The prince that she loves marries someone else and doesn't love the mermaid, and she actually dies, falls into the ocean, and turns into sea foam. Yeah, and there are so many different versions of the story. Other people say that she went to be like an air goddess and rose into the heavens. Basically, every story I'm telling you, there's a bunch of different versions, so if I'm not saying the version you're used to, there are other slightly different versions. Alright, and lastly, let's talk about Rapunzel. So you're all used to the story where Rapunzel lets down her golden braid of hair and the prince climbs up when the witch isn't there and they fall in love. Well, in the original version, when the prince climbs up Rapunzel's hair, they instantly fall in love and actually conceive a child, like right away. Well, the witch finds this out. She cuts off Rapunzel's hair and banishes her to a desert. The prince comes back and climbs the tower because the witch is pretending that she's Rapunzel. He climbs up, sees it's the witch, and she's like, "You'll never see Rapunzel ever again." And then he falls down the tower and lands into bushes of thorns, and the thorns go into his eyes and blind him. Then for several years, he walks the earth as a homeless blind man searching for Rapunzel. That's actually so dark and sad. He finally finds Rapunzel, and she's a mother of 2 twins struggling on her own, and she ends up crying over the blind prince, and her tears fall into his eyes, which heals them, and he's able to see again because of her tears. His sight is restored, and then they go get married in the magical kingdom. So that was like the only story that really ended well, but it still had so many dark parts to it. All right, I'm gonna end the video here. There are so many other fairy tales I can go into. I just don't want to make this video like hours and hours long. So if you want me to do like a part 2 of like the 2 sides of fairy tales, definitely give this video a thumbs up and let me know. If you would like a cute Valentine's Day plush, link is down below in the description. But I hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day, and I will see you in my next video.